Something happens just before your life changes, but it doesn't look like a breakthrough. It looks like silence, stillness, the strange quiet after the storm, or maybe before one. You wake up, not broken, but empty, not in pain, but not quite alive either. It's as if your soul is holding its breath. The things that once lit you up don't spark. The goals that once drove you now feel like echoes. People ask how you're doing. You say fine, but inside, you're floating in a space that has no name. You're not who you were, but you don't yet know who you're becoming. Carl Jung called this the threshold, the in-between, where the ego begins to dissolve, and the deeper self, the real self, begins to rise. This isn't regression. It's preparation. If you've lost interest in the life you built, if you feel calm, but vaguely disconnected, if your emotions seem muted, and your ambitions feel like someone else's, you're not falling apart. You're shedding, letting go of what no longer fits, even if you don't yet know what comes next. Transformation doesn't come with fireworks. It begins in the dark, in the strange quiet of your own unraveling. These are the 4 subtle signs. You're not stuck. You're on the verge. Let's begin. It's as if your soul is holding its breath. The things that once lit you up don't spark. The things that used to hurt don't sting the same way. You're not in pain exactly, but you're not fully living either. It's like standing at the shoreline in the dark, sensing the tide is about to turn, but not knowing when or how. If you're here, caught in this silent pause, know this. You're not lost. You're not regressing. You are preparing. Carl Jung believed that all true transformation begins in the unconscious, often long before the conscious mind catches up. He spoke of this in-between state as sacred, where the ego begins to dissolve and the self starts to rise. So, if you feel tired for no reason, still, despite your efforts, strange without explanation, you may be closer to change than you realize. This stillness isn't stagnation. It's the final breath before a new life begins. In this video, we'll explore 4 quiet signs that you're not stuck. You're standing at the threshold of your own becoming. Breakthrough isn't always fireworks or a sudden sense of knowing. It rarely feels like triumph in the moment. More often, it feels like confusion, restlessness, grief, or stillness. From a Jungian perspective, a breakthrough is not about fixing your life. It's about shedding who you thought you were so that who you truly are can rise. Jung believed that before any great leap in consciousness, the psyche must pass through a symbolic death. Old patterns collapse. Old stories lose their grip. The ego, once in control, grows quiet. And in that quiet, something ancient stirs the self. Not the self you perform, but the one you've always been underneath. This is the deeper architecture of transformation, not about achieving something new, but remembering something eternal. The path of individuation, as Jung called it, is not linear. It spirals, contracts, dissolves, and rebuilds. And often just before we step into new light, we must walk through the ashes of who we've been. If you feel like something is ending, but you can't name what's next, if you feel like you're in the final chapters of a story that no longer fits, you may not be unraveling. You may be crossing the inner gate. So, how do you know the difference between being stuck and being on the verge of everything changing? Let's explore the 4 signs you're at the final stage before a breakthrough. Sign number 1, you feel strangely calm but also empty. It's hard to explain to others because on the surface, everything seems fine. You're not falling apart. You're not crying in parking lots or unraveling in the middle of conversations. But something feels off, eerily still. Your emotions have quieted, but not in a peaceful way. The highs don't lift you, and the lows don't pull you under. You're just here, not in pain, not in joy, just floating. And while that may sound like relief, it can feel unsettling, like you've stepped out of your own story, but haven't yet been handed a new script. Carl Jung believed that this strange stillness is not meaningless. It's a sacred phase. He Saw it as the moment when the ego, tired of striving and clinging, begins to loosen its grip. Before any transformation, the psyche must pause. Before the butterfly emerges, the caterpillar dissolves into a shapeless state. This is what you're in, the void. But the void isn't empty. It's preparation. When you stop striving, when your nervous system finally lets go of constant tension, your entire being begins to conserve energy. It's not giving up, it's gathering. Something inside you knows that a leap is coming, and it refuses to waste energy pushing against doors that no longer open. You may notice that even your thoughts slow down. The frantic mental loops that used to exhaust you begin to fade. Old worries seem distant. Even your ambitions may feel temporarily muted. This isn't failure. It's psychic rest. Your inner world, after fighting so hard to stay afloat, is now floating for a reason, because the fight is over. The version of you that once needed to prove, to chase, to force is quietly dying. And in that death, space is being made for something deeper, something more aligned, more real. It's easy to confuse this state with depression. But if you look closely, it's not despair. It's surrender. It's not numbness. It's neutrality. The soul is exhaling after holding its breath for too long. So if you feel calm in a way that also feels hollow, don't panic. Don't rush to fill it. This quiet emptiness isn't the end. It's the sacred pause, the inhale before the transformation begins. Sign number 2, old triggers no longer hook you. At first, it doesn't even register as a shift. Someone says something that would have normally set you off. Dismissive, passive-aggressive, manipulative, and instead of reacting, you just notice. You see it for what it is. You breathe, and you move on. Not out of numbness. Not because you're suppressing anything, but because it simply doesn't land the same way anymore. The emotional charge is gone. The sting is missing. It's like realizing you've grown out of costume you didn't know you were still wearing. This is one of the most subtle but powerful signs of inner transformation. Carl Jung believed that what we do not make conscious will continue to appear in our lives as fate. The people, patterns, and dynamics that once triggered us weren't random. They were invitations, mirrors reflecting back the unhealed parts of us. But when we begin to integrate those unconscious wounds, something remarkable happens. The mirrors lose their power. You no longer need to fight every battle because the war inside you is ending. You don't chase closure from people who can't give it. You don't collapse when someone misunderstands you. You don't abandon yourself to be chosen. This isn't apathy. It's evolution. You're not disconnected. You're discerning. The inner hooks that used to yank you into reactive loops have been untied gently over time by the deeper work you've been doing. And now, when life offers you the same test, you choose differently. Not because you've forced yourself to, but because you've changed. You've shifted from survival to sovereignty. You stopped handing out backstage passes to people who only show up when it's convenient. And in that quiet refusal, something liberates. Your energy returns to you. Your peace stays intact. You realize you don't need to explain yourself to be valid. Don't need to shrink yourself to keep the peace. Don't need to bleed just to be seen. The storm still exists, but it no longer pulls you under. The people and dynamics may not have changed, but you have. And that change is real, embodied, and powerful. When you're no longer destabilized by the same old patterns, it's not because you've escaped them. It's because you've integrated the part of you that used to need them. That's the quiet revolution of healing. It shows up not in grand declarations, but in the calm way you now walk away. Sign number 3, you're mourning. Things you thought you already let go. It catches you off guard. An old memory, rising like smoke from a place you thought had burned out. You're washing dishes, walking to the store, sitting in silence, and suddenly there's a lump in your throat, a tightness in your chest, a wave of emotion that feels strangely familiar. You might dream of someone you haven't thought about in years, feel a sudden longing for a place you no longer call home, or a cry at the sound of a song that once meant everything. It doesn't always make sense. You thought you were done with this chapter. You thought you already grieved it, but now it's back, not with chaos, but with tenderness. Carl Jung understood this as the psyche's final sweep. When we're nearing a true transformation, the unconscious often brings up old material, not to torment us, but to release it completely. These are echoes, not failures. Ghosts of the past rising to be honored one last time. This isn't regression, it's refinement. The grief that returns at this stage is different. It doesn't demand a story or a solution. It asks only to be witnessed, because now you're not the same person who first experienced that pain. You're stronger, softer, wiser. You're not clinging to the past. You're blessing it. And in doing so, you allow yourself to fully let go. This is how the psyche closes loops with reverence. It doesn't erase the memory. It reprocesses it through the eyes of who you've become. What you're feeling is not weakness. It's clarity, the kind that only comes when the heart is finally safe enough to feel without being consumed. You may find yourself holding an old photo, not with regret, but with quiet gratitude for what was, for what it taught you, and for the version of you who carried it all. This morning is not a detour from healing. It's the threshold of it, a clearing out of the emotional residue that no longer belongs to your next chapter. And though it hurts, it's a sacred kind of hurt. The ache before the bloom. This is grief, clearing the soil for joy. The heart, making space before it opens again. Sign number 4. You feel called to let go, but don't know what comes next. After all the clearing, the calm, the detachment, and the grief, you find yourself here in the strange in between. You know something is ending. You can feel in your bones. A chapter is closing, a role dissolving, a pattern unraveling. But what replaces it hasn't arrived yet. You're standing on the edge of the familiar, staring into a fog you can't see beyond. And that uncertainty, though quiet, is heavy. You feel the urge to release, to surrender, to stop clinging to what no longer fits, but you have no map for what's coming. Carl Jung spoke of this liminal space through the idea of enantiodroia, when inner opposites collide, creating such tension that the ego is forced to soften, to yield. It's the moment when your old strategies no longer work and your new ones haven't yet formed. This isn't collapse. It's not failure. It's the soul calling you to surrender, not as defeat, but as alignment. The deeper self, the one beneath the noise, already knows what the mind cannot yet name. And so you stop. You no longer chase clarity like a prize. You no longer wrestle for control. Instead, you sit in the not knowing. You listen, you wait, you trust. And though the mind may scream for certainty, some deeper part of you knows that this pause is not empty. It's sacred. You begin to clear space in your life and within your being, space for what's to come. You might find yourself removing things that once felt essential, pulling away from people who no longer resonate, simplifying, softening. There's no big explanation, just an intuitive whisper. It's time. You don't need to know where you're going yet. You only need to stop resisting where you are, because this is the final test before transformation, the moment where you're asked to loosen your grip on everything you thought defined you and trust the unfolding, not in theory, but in practice, not in comfort, but in faith. You're not floating aimlessly. You're being held in place by something wiser than logic. The seed doesn't need to understand the tree it will become. It only needs darkness, stillness, and time. So if you feel called to let go, even without a next step in sight, don't panic. This is the soul's threshold, The edge before the emergence, the quiet. Trust before your next becoming. As you sit with these signs, this calm, emptiness, the fading of old triggers, the unexpected grief, and the call to let go, take a moment to ask yourself, which of these have I felt lately? You're not stuck. You're not broken. You are in the sacred space of becoming. This is your threshold moment where who you are meets who you are becoming. To honor this passage, consider lighting a candle or writing a letter to your future self, marking this edge with intention. Let the ritual be a quiet ceremony of release and invitation, a way to witness your transformation unfolding in real time. Remember, you don't need to see the entire path to know you're on it. Sometimes your soul already knows, and your only job is to listen to the silence, the stillness, the subtle stirring beneath the surface. Trust that you are being carried forward even when the way is not clear. You're not lost. You're in between. And the in-between is holy. The cocoon isn't failure. It's preparation. Carl Jung taught us that the unconscious moves quietly, shaping and shifting beneath awareness before it reveals itself in the light. So if your life feels strange, uncertain, or still, this is the sacred sign of transformation. You are standing at the threshold not of an ending but of your greatest unfolding. This is Echoes of Psyche, where the soul remembers what the mind forgets. You are not unraveling. You are remembering. And what's rising inside you now is not the end. It's the emergence. So if you're trembling, grieving, or standing still, you're not behind. You're just one breath away from becoming the version of you who's been waiting to arrive. Fire now, ask yourself, what have I outgrown? Speech balloon, let me know in the comments. The version of you that's silently fading and the one that's starting to rise.